My name is Aryeh Halivni, formerly Eric Weisberg, longtime Camp Stone connection. Went there as a camper, worked there, was the Rosh Moshe in 1993 and 1994, and I'm very excited about this new project that Camp Stone is doing this summer with Indoor World to be able to provide something during these challenging times for people who have long been connected to Camp Stone and might not be able to actually attend in person this year, but still hope to be able to enjoy from it. 75 years ago, on July 1st, 1945, on a sweltering Sunday in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, a meeting took place in the penthouse apartment of Rudolf Sonnenborn. David Ben-Gurion was coming to the United States, and he had asked Henry Monter, who was the head of the UJ in New York and Israel Bonds, to what became ultimately the founder of Israel Bonds, to convene a meeting of people who would be sympathetic and be able to be supportive of the Zionist cause, well-to-do and well-connected people from all over the country, and bring them together so that Ben-Gurion could lay out his plan of trying to be able to recruit the help of American Jewry to ward the founding, what ultimately became the founding of the State of Israel. And that's what he did. About 20 people gathered there at this meeting, and Ben-Gurion spoke for a few hours and explained to them what the needs were, what the challenges were, and what he was hoping that they would be able to provide in being able to recruit individuals for manpower, to be able to raise the funds, to be able to help and designate people to be able to purchase army surplus, airplanes, bullets, weapons, uniforms, all kinds of different things so that they could be shipped over to the cause and would ultimately be help in the contribution toward what would become the State of Israel. And the people there rose to the occasion, and they gathered themselves and they formed an informal group that was known as the Sonnenborn Institute, and that's exactly what they did. They raised huge sums of money. The stories of how they smuggled weapons and shipped things and are inspiring and incredible stories. And I had heard about this and I learned about some of these things from books that I had read, but it wasn't really until I was working in the project that I now have been working on for the last several years, Toldot Israel, where we're interviewing people that were involved in the founding of the State of Israel, that I finally understood how this happened. I knew that there was this meeting, and I knew that there was the Sonnenborn Institute, but where did the money come from? How did it work? Did people just did they recruit wealthy people and they would just give the money and write checks? And I just never really understood how the whole process worked. And it was only in some of these interviews that I began to see what really went into it. And what happened was that people would go back to their communities, or people would have these meetings in New York, these parlor meetings, and people would come to hear a report about what was going on in Palestine, what was going on in the Zionist movement, and then they would leave cash on the table, and women would take off their jewelry and leave it on the table. And that's how they raised the money. There was no receipts. Everybody just gave whatever they could, whatever they had. People would take off their watch. People would take off their necklace, their bracelet, their earrings. People would take whatever cash they would have in their pockets. People would have poker games. And at the end of the poker game, somebody would come around and they would take a bag and they would put all of the winnings from the poker game and they would collect that money, and that money went to help the acquisition of uniforms, of army surplus, so that they would be able to come into being the State of Israel. And it was unbelievable when I discovered that, and what the realization was, and the similarity was for me, was that this sounds just like the story of the building of the Mishkan, that Moshe Rabbeinu asked people if they would be able to contribute, and people responded so enthusiastically until the point that he had to say, enough, we've got everything that we need. But people came and they just gave what they had. Everybody they took their jewelry, they took whatever it was, and the stories sound so similar. It was really inspiring that the story over here is one of every person contributing, every person giving what they could in order to make this possible. The story of the Mishkan is interesting. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs asks a question. He says, why is it that when we are going through Sefer Shmot, and we're going through the progression there, from Makot, Yetziat Mitzrayim, Matan Torah, why doesn't that Sefer end over there? Why isn't that the end of the story? And then we'll just talk about the Mishkan together with the idea with Sefer Vayikra, with the Korbanot. Why do we continue when we have reached this pinnacle? And he says the point is that up until then, the Bnei Israel were complaining. And there was a lot of complaints that were going on about the lack of food and lack of water, and no one was taking responsibility. And the story of the Egel HaZahav are all taking place. It's just a series of complaints leading up till that point. And that's when Hashem says to them, let them build something together. And they did. And that was the change, the switch where the people went from this dependency to responsibility. The idea that we could build something together. The creative partnership that is brought about is the culminating piece of Yetziat Mitzrayim. It's not just the Exodus. It's not just Matan Torah. It is building something together. And when you build something together, that is when you take responsibility and you create a community. And I think that that's one of the wonderful things about Campstone. The idea that the contributions that people make are in a multitude of ways. And everybody has the ability to contribute. And everybody does what they can and does their most to be able to make this not just an experience, but to make it a community. And I think that that is a wonderful lesson, and a wonderful lesson, especially in these times, that Campstone is still working to create this community. And when we work together and when we create this community, it's not just the ability to build the Mishkan. It is not just the ability to work in Campstone. It is the ability to build a society, and that is what we learned about in these stories about what happened 75 years ago to build the state of Israel. And I think that all of these things are related, and I hope that everybody is able to do their utmost and contribute and enjoy themselves this summer toward that end. B'hatzlacha.